Okay, IEMs are everywhere right now. In gaming and audio circles, everyone is ditching over-ear headphones for these, swearing by the comfort, the detail, and the improved focus. I was super skeptical though, so I spent the last few months testing them for everything: intense gaming sessions, editing marathons, work calls, and music. Spoiler, there are killer upsides like pinpoint footsteps that saved my butt in Overwatch and in Tarkov many times. But there's also trade-offs that had me boxing them up at first. So let's dive into my roller coaster with these things, what they nail, and where they fall short. My go-to headphones for the last while have been the Beyerdynamic DT700 Pro X, and they sound amazing. But after hours at the desk, the clamping force, the heat, and the head dents, they start to add up. Well, enter IEMs, and my first few days with them was kind of a bust. Muddy sound, claustrophobic feel, and not at all what I was expecting. I nearly quit until I fixed one key issue that apparently changed everything. I've mainly been using the Kiwi Ears Aether with some time on the Tekusai Lucid and the Linsol KS10 Pro. Each one has its quirks, but I'm going to focus more on the big picture of the IEM experience, stuff that applies more broadly rather than the nitty-gritty of each individual model. When it comes to games, in things like Overwatch and Call of Duty and Rainbow Six, the detail coming out of these things is pretty insane. Every reload, every ability sound, every footstep, and every gunshot is piped straight into my ear canals, and everything sounds so immediate and precise and very detailed. Even though the soundstage is tighter than what I am used to, I never felt like I was missing audio cues in these situations. Directional awareness is really solid thanks to the excellent imaging, and really subtle sounds were easier to pick out even compared to my current main headphones. Now, the Aether's sharp and detailed character really shines in competitive shooters where precision matters more than spatial immersion. There were several moments where I caught very faint footsteps that alerted me to an enemy's direction, sounds that I'm not entirely sure I would have picked up on with my regular headphones. Part of this comes from the isolation, and IEMs provide this by literally plugging your ears, blocking out external noise. But you also have the advantage for subtle sounds simply due to how close the drivers actually sit to your eardrums, making those tiny details more apparent. This extra detail and sharpness though can come at a cost, and there were a few times when it felt almost overwhelming. Clanking metal footsteps in Tarkov Arena, for instance, were very sharp and at times was almost disorienting figuring out what sound I needed to pay attention to in the moment. Arguably though, the larger drawback to not just these, but it seems like IEMs in general, is the soundstage. Everything that I have tested thus far seems to have the same characteristic in common, so it's safe to assume that this is generally true of in-ear monitors. Though admittedly, some really expensive models may not suffer from this quite as much, but where this manifests is in more immersive and sim-heavy games. Escape from Tarkov is a great example. The narrow soundstage starts to feel like a real limitation because it's not just about can I hear the footsteps. It's about how far away they are and what kind of space they are in. And with these, well, the sound still comes through and often very clearly, but it feels like everything is happening right next to you. Not an issue when you're inside of a building or in a small arena style map, but when you're in a big outdoor open space, the ambient sound starts to feel much closer and tighter, and it's almost like the world is folding in around you rather than expanding outward. And that sense of scale and depth, well, it's just not quite there. This carries over into single-player titles like Elder Scrolls Oblivion and Elden Ring, where the sound in those games contributes to the world building and the atmosphere, and switching to these reminded me a lot of switching from open back to closed back headphones, but just much more extreme. Now, to be clear, you still hear everything, but the space just collapses and it can start to feel a little bit boxed in, so you just lose that sense of scale and the overall ambiance is diminished. I discovered though that the physical fit in your ear plays a major role in this and how much this affects you. This matters a lot more than it does with traditional headphones, and it took me a little while to figure it out. With headphones, I have never thought about how the fit was affecting the actual sound, but with IEMs, tiny adjustments in the tip size, how deep they sit in your ear, and even the angle that you put them in can totally change how they sound and how they feel. When the fit is good, it's amazing. But if the tips are too big or if the seal is off, well, you start getting pressure, discomfort, and in my experience, muddy audio. Now, these out of the box sounded really muddy to me, and after spending some time swapping tips, I found something that was not only comfortable, but also opened up the sound, alleviating some of that narrow soundstage, but more importantly, improving the best feature, which is the clarity and the detail. Along the lines of comfort, the size of the individual nozzles plays a pretty big part, and it is something that I noticed with the Aethers was a bit uncomfortable for long sessions. It's a bit thick and chunky, and it did leave my ears feeling a little bit tender from time to time, as opposed to the Lucids, which I could comfortably wear for hours. So here's where I've landed. Audio is already really subjective, and IEMs kind of take that to a whole nother level. The physical feel and the fit are directly tied to how they sound, and that makes the experience more personal, but also a little bit harder to dial in and harder to make specific recommendations, especially when you're not able to try them out in advance. For me, in competitive shooters like Overwatch and Counter-Strike, I think they're fantastic. They're precise, they're clean, and if you can find the right fit for your ears, I think in some ways they can be advantageous over traditional headphones. For more immersive stuff though, single player games and sim shooters, I still prefer the traditional headphone experience. And in the end, I think for me, I'm gonna be keeping a pair of these on my desk to use in addition to my standard headphones, just not as a full replacement. If you've been thinking about making the switch, hopefully this gives you a better sense of what to expect. But thanks so much for watching. Drop a comment with what you currently use in your audio setup. And until next time, my name is Robbie. This has been EverTech, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye now.